Well, top of the morning or evening, whatever it is to you gardeners and homesteaders. We hope everybody's having a fantastic day, and we're just so happy to be here with you. We hope you're having a great holiday season. Right now, Batavia and myself are planning our gardens for next year. We're getting our seeds started, our seeds in order, getting everything going, and we want to just give this opportunity, first of all, for you guys to hear the top 5 episodes from last year. So these are the episodes that you guys listened to the most, commented, and enjoyed on. So be sure to enjoy these. I'm excited to re-listen to them myself. And also, we have a couple of announcements. One is I am starting to do seed starting date profiles for people. So if that's something you're interested in and you want, we can do a seed starting profile for you. Just email me at sandybottomhomestead@gmail.com. And the first 10 people to do it are going to get a 50% off discount. And this will be geared for you in your area. So give me your state and your city that you live in, and we'll get you a customized seed starting schedule for you. Because what I've found out in the past couple of years is, in fact, I was starting my seeds way too late, and I wasn't taking proper precautions and using the seeds to the best of their ability to grow bigger, stronger plants and thrive more, rotate my crops out so I can get 3 to 4 season gardening out of it. Depending on where you are, you can get that 4th season. Little disclaimer there. But definitely reach out at sandybottomhomestead@gmail.com and we'll get one made for you. And also, we are proud to give you our sponsor, which is Planter app. And like I said, this is the time of year where we're going to be planning our gardens, and we will be using the Planter app. It is an amazing app, and it's grown so much over the years. It's amazing. But you can create profiles on it. You can make all your different gardens and layouts, and it's drag and drop interface. It has all the details you need for your plantings, for your plants, for your frost dates, your days to go out. It has everything you need, gives you pest controls, companion, combative plantings, it's got it all. I mean, it's something that I have really fallen in love with over the year, and I credit the success of my garden to this over the years. So definitely check it out. There's a link below that will get you a hefty discount on it. So please take advantage of that, because this is the season in which we're going to be starting our gardens and planting them. And we want you to take advantage of it so you can get off to a great start for the year. And it is available on Apple and Google. You can use it on your PC. You can use it on your tablet and your phone. So anywhere you are, you can use this app. So check it out. That's the Planter app, the PLANTER app. And make sure you use the link below to get your discount. And that was a mouthful, everybody. So without further ado, we're going to play these episodes. And just know we are planning our gardens just as hard as we can, because we are ready for the new year. And also New Batavia, if you know what I'm saying. But also the next gardening season. So everybody, as you listen to this, remember, we're going to learn to grow and grow for change. But look, everybody, it is the end of the growing season. That's right. And your area is probably over. And you're probably thinking, I'm going to put my gardens to bed. But don't do it yet. We got an all-important task that you should do now, and you should not wait to do it into spring like a lot of people say. Right here on the Backyard Gardens podcast.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Now, we need to talk about the foundation of our garden. Don't you think, Batavia?
I mean, I don't know. That's what we talked about in the pre-show, but sure. Let's talk about the foundation.
I mean, the foundation is the bottom. It's the soil. In my experience, this is one of the hardest pieces to the puzzle to kind of get it all sorted out. Batavia, I think we had a long discussion about it one day, longer than I'd like to admit. And she fell into it, man. I like it, though. She's got a plan, and it works well. and it seems to have worked very well for her over the years. So,
oh, you mean I stumbled into it?
Yeah. Stumbled into it, and I don't see a problem with that. First of all, I don't want you to think that's like a stab at you. I think that's how I've done a lot of things in my garden, but this one thing is very important, and it's, before you put the gardens to bed and they're going to sleep, if you can do that, you don't want to just waste that valuable time, because life doesn't stop out there.
I think every year I go searching on, does it make sense to make, updates, amending things in the spring or the fall. There's things I would do in the garden where I kind of want to do it, air quote, by the book. But then there are things that I want to do in the garden because it's the most convenient, and after this number of years gardening, like, I know myself as a gardener, so I know what I'm most likely to do or not do, no matter what I say. And so I think when you talk about some of the things I stumbled into, it's funny because it was at a time where I thought it was the proper thing to do.
Yeah.
So I know it sounds like there's a riddle here, but I think it'll become clear in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're clearly talking about amending beds. And, for years, I don't even know if I amended my beds for years. I think I always just like topped them off a little bit, but I never put a lot of science behind it or anything. And I always had good luck. And here's the key. Once I started trying to put science behind it, I started having issues. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, overthinking it maybe.
Yeah, overthinking it. And that was kind of when we were talking in the last show about, second guessing myself when parts of the lifestyle I don't like that's come out of gardening. That would be one of them. I've gotten some advice over the years of, well, first of all, the main advice was, amend your beds in the spring. Amend your beds in the spring. Do that now. And then it was a couple years ago, I did a couple things in my bed, but one of the things that I did is in the winter, I took chicken manure fresh out of my coop and spread that in my garden, which I don't know if you know or not, but that's like a big no-no. You don't want to put fresh manure in your garden. You need to age it first.
Mm-hmm.
And
but why?
For toxins and stuff like that, okay. Honestly, I don't know. All I know is it can make you sick. I don't know totally, but that's one of the big things I've heard. And so I'm like, okay, I get it, especially like large amounts of manure. But my theory of it was, look, I'm not going to plant in this bed for a couple months. So if I put it out there now, it's just going to age in the bed and start to break down in the bed. So what could I be losing? You know what I mean? And that seemed to work extremely well. So moving forward, that's kind of one of those things. And I've started doing it earlier and earlier into what I call the season for me. Because, fall is essentially like a second spring for me, kind of. Not really, but kind of. It's like a race into spring. But reading about stuff, compost is a big thing, too, to add to your garden.
Yeah, I think it's the state of the compost when it comes to some experts, whether they recommend adding it in the spring or fall. I was trying to look it up. It's, kind of packaged compost. It's recommended to add during X season, and then fresh compost is requested to be added during X season. I'll figure it out before we get wrapped up. But spoiler alert, so if you're adding compost in the spring, like a month before planting, like I don't have that much time for like the first planting is coming out. So if I'm trying to get some things planted in March, I don't really have an opportunity in February to add compost, right? Like in February, there's some things that are still frozen. In February, there's some things that are still completely snow covered. And so that's why, and this is the spoiler, for me and just my kind of approach, it just makes more sense for me to get these things done in the fall.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how much I lose, if you will, am I losing some of the nutrients in kind of this snow-packed garden bed? But I've come to the point where I can't care about that. You can't tell me if this soil is still fit to plant in next year, that if I add some amendments that they just are going to be washed away. I mean, I'm not adding liquid fertilizer, and like, why isn't it feeding my plants 8 months later? I'm not saying that, you know. So I think that just from my style of the way that I'm ready to get up and go in the spring, we talked about this a couple episodes ago. It's waiting until the end to do those steps for me is a prime example of me getting distracted, me getting a later start. I love the idea of being able to uncover a bed or look at the snow melt on a bed and then be basically ready to plant in it. You know, move some mulch around and get ready to plant in it. And, you know, the only thing, and we should talk about this, the only thing that I never add in the fall, I don't normally top off a bed in the fall with soil. That's not anything that I've ever done. I definitely add some to mini beds in the spring, like when I'm planting, but that's not a step that I've done kind of as I close out the garden year. And it hasn't been like me consciously saying I'm not going to do it. I just never really thought enough to say I needed to.
Yeah. All right. So you brought it up. Let's crack it open. You top off your beds with what?
So it's going to be a layer of compost, and I'm terrible about these things, you know, since I use bag compost. If I have a 10-foot by 4-foot bed, that may be like 2 to 3 bags of compost. Maybe it comes in at an inch and a half of compost, if I had to guess. And then I try to, and I just got, you know, a message from my Leaf Connect. And I try to add some type of mulch product, leaves, straw. I try, emphasis on try not to leave the beds bare.
Right.
And that's it for fall for me.
Right. And then in the spring, you come back and you top off with...
It depends on the bed, and depends on the year, depends on, you know, when I'm planting there. But in the best version of this in the spring, beds on the concrete patio, which I know are losing soil right as we speak, right? You know, so I'll come in with some fresh soil. So that's a good example of making the distinction. I probably won't add compost to the beds on the concrete patio unless I'm planting in them.
Right.
Like if I'm putting garlic in them again this year, I'll add some compost. But the rest of them, I'll leave them, not amend at all, just add some mulch potentially. Right. And so the better case scenario, front yard beds, the cage baby, once I've done that 1-step, 2-step, compost, mulch, then when I come back in the spring, I'll add a bit of, maybe a little bit more, just a handful more compost when I'm planting. And then when I have the kind of now bare beds, not amended beds on the concrete patio, I'm starting off like from day one, I'm adding more soil. Right. Because I've probably, for a bed that sits 10 or 11 inches tall, I'm probably at like 7, 8 inches of soil left.
Right.
So I'm topping those beds off, adding fresh compost. Fresh, I mean just like it's out of the bag. And then again, my intention is to plant in them. If I'm direct sowing, once things germinate, then I'll add mulch. Yeah. You know, or I'll move the mulch back on. So it's a mixture of that. The mulch piece has always been a challenge for me as I try to amend. And for me, amend means adding some kind of, you know, soil or compost.
Yeah. So if you search off, you know, if you go and you go down the rabbit hole and you search like topping off garden beds or mending garden beds, most of the time the only thing you're going to get is compost. Add compost, 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 like over and over again. And so historically, I think earlier in my gardening career, what I did is I would get, I used to use, I have no problem shouting out this company. I wish I could buy it here. I think it was like Gulf of Maine garden soil. I used to use that. It's, you know, it's obviously a New England thing. You can get it here, but it's so incredibly expensive. It's not even worth it. I used to use that. And the reason why I used it was garden soil. So I'd top off with that. And then I got into like composting and all that stuff. And so I was adding compost over and over. And this year, as I was digging into my soil, I was noticing that the dirt was crumbly. right? And I mean, if it was wet, it definitely, you could squeeze it, you know, if you had watered it and it would hold shape, but it would dry out really fast. And then I started getting, on my peppers, I started getting chlorosis. And so when I did a soil test, I had high phosphorus content. And that really confused me because I was like, I don't understand where this comes from, this, that, and the other. And so I was out at my local compost maker and I was talking to him and we were having a discussion about it. And he, you know, it's the amount of compost that you add, if you add too much, can add to that phosphorus content, which you can't get out of your soil, right? It holds it. So then we were talking about it and I was like, well, what do you recommend I do? And he was like, well, you need to be topping off your beds with topsoil. And I was like, just plain old topsoil. And he's like, yes. And he was saying that is the single most important ingredient you can put into your garden, more so than compost, because compost will break down and it will add to the soil, but it won't necessarily make more topsoil. So you need, if you're going to, because, you know, as the beds settle, that organic matter doesn't really totally break down evenly. So you need to add this because it helps with the transportation of, look at that big word, of nutrients going to the plants. So it's very interesting to me. And so then we started talking about, well, like spring or fall or winter. And this is for my area where we don't get a hard freeze. But he was saying even where it does freeze, fall is the best time to do it, like late fall, when basically you're done, you're raking up your leaves anyways. You know, most gardeners are collecting for mulch or compost or something like that. And then doing as you do, topping off. So, and I think like you've done, you've used garden soil typically, which is good. But I think because you've done it for so many years, you've already got that breakdown process going on, and you're not just adding only compost, because you and I did the math off air, and it was like a 3-to-1 ratio, I believe we came up with, of 3 garden soil to 1 compost. Yeah. So that was a very telling discussion that we had, because you can tell that, you know, over the years, all that garden soil is outweighing the compost that you're putting in, and you've naturally made this, you know, this good dirt in your garden. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And for almost all of the garden beds, that's not true. About half of the garden beds have had soil in them and growing before I ever added compost. Yeah. And I can't say that I've basically all of that soil has escaped or has been, you know, suppressed or anything. There's still some of that, I'm going to use the term original earth, you know, original soil in there. I think it's interesting because this year is probably I was kind of conscious of it, but really paid attention to it this year. And it primarily because I've been growing more root crops, the different textures of soil throughout my garden, right? You know, so I have the very original garden, which is basically what the cage baby sits on top of. It definitely is. It's more reminiscent of what you'd get out of a bag of topsoil, right? Definitely what kind of you imagine earth is like, right? And then I have the raised beds on the concrete patio, which a couple of those beds have much more pliable soil. And then a couple kind of feels like they struggled. Like it's a little bit more sandy, you know, you could see sometimes water repels off of it, you know. And then if you go to the front yard, it's actually a mixed bag, right? And it's interesting because the majority of the soil in those beds were from that original soil dump back in 2019. And it feels like that soil still needs a lot of attention. Right. You know, now don't get it twisted. Now I've grown some great food in those beds, but when it comes to kind of being crumbly, you know, kind of big kind of blocks of caked up kind of soil. Those are the 2 primary beds and a couple closer to the house. But I have a couple of beds that I built out using a mixture of things. And I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before. And these are these beds, you can plant anything on it in it, has been my experience. Root crop, tomato, you know, so anything in the nightshade family, brassica, like you could plant anything, and it seems like it does well. And it's a mixture of kind of some throwaway stuff. Spent potting soil, which we know the texture of potting soil is very different than your regular topsoil, garden soil, or anything of the like. Some actual garden soil, some compost. And as I've turned those beds over, whether it's with a spade or a shovel or whatever have you, I can just tell the difference in those beds. And it's kind of like, that's my goal. That's what I aspire to have in the rest of the garden. I can grow radishes in those 2 beds, where I struggle to grow radishes in, the biggest beds in the front yard, just based on the soil makeup.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with adding potting soil, small amounts of it, to like a raised bed or something. I know a lot of people that I've read are like, don't ever do it. It's the worst thing ever. And I don't see that, because you get that extra water retention. So it kind of helps.
Just to be very clear. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just want to be, and I should have mentioned this when I said it. These are beds that sit, 17 inches tall.
Yeah.
So it's a much taller bed than you'd normally, a lot of people have when they're building raised beds. So I definitely was adding potting soil, not as a strategic move for soil health or soil nutrients. It was quite literally a filler.
Right.
But as all that stuff starts to get mixed in,
Well, and when I was younger, I used to buy, when I was first, even before I had a garden, I was just getting some containers, trying to grow some like flowers or something. I don't know what I was trying to grow. But I remember buying like the cheapest bag of topsoil you could get, and it had pieces of trash in it, and it was just real ugly. So for a long time, I didn't buy any topsoil. And when I was planting my peach tree this year, I had bought, I wanted to put topsoil and compost in the hole, as well as some native soil, but I didn't want to use anything that had fertilizer in it, for the simple fact of it was fall. I was planting it, and I didn't want to encourage more growth than was necessary. So I bought some topsoil, and when I opened the bag, and this wasn't like super high quality, but it wasn't like the cheapest of the cheap you can get. And I believe when I bought the original bag, it was like 25 cents at Walmart or something like that. It was dirt cheap. But I opened it up, and I was shocked the second I opened it up, and I ran my hands through it. I was like, damn, this has got good texture. It's nice and fluffy. Like, I could tell as soon as I opened it that is something that needed to go into the garden. That's kind of what set me on the path when we had that conversation, because as over the years, my beds they've broken down, so I need to top off a couple inches probably on each bed. And so the question became okay, now what should I put in there? Because I remember I topped off real heavy with compost a few years ago, and I haven't put any topsoil in since I've built out my beds. And I was talking to my friend again, and he was saying that he had 2 people come. One person filled up their beds completely with just topsoil that he got from them, and the other guy used a combination of like bagged soil and compost, and they planted. And then the guy that did the combination also gave his neighbor, the other guy, his plants that he grew from seed, and they both planted them. And he said within a month, that guy came back to have the combination and said, I need to get more topsoil. I need to pull it out because the plants were growing so differently. And he was like, what did what is the difference? And he's like, all I did is I got topsoil. That's it. Nothing else. And I think the word topsoil gets a bad rap. You know what I mean? Because we think that everything's poisoned and ruined and stuff like that, when it's just the natural things that things grow on all across our entire planet until we get into it.
So I have some topsoil in my garage, and I purchased it for the purpose of topping off some beds. I purchased this back in the spring, topping off some beds, mixing up my own container mix, right? So I also want to be clear, from my experience, topsoil or even garden soil is kind of heavy for most of your containers, right? It definitely needs something that's a bit more light, as drainage is always an issue with my containers, and wanting that to make sure that it's not holding too much water. So something like topsoil is pretty heavy, and when you put it in a raised bed or in ground, it has the earth to naturally kind of drain, right? And so I think that topsoil, one could argue that there's a bit of marketing in, you create a whole other brand of garden soil, and then for decades it's recommended that you only use this in your garden, and you use topsoil when you're planting, grass or something, right? Topsoil is generally cheaper always than your garden soil bags. So there's a bit of that going on. But when you open up topsoil compared to garden soil, you can look at it and see the difference.
Clear.
You open up all three of them: potting soil, garden soil, topsoil. And I don't think I'll ever add only topsoil to a garden bed. But I do think as we're looking at amending our beds, it could make sense for me to add topsoil to the one bed that I had the mixture of the spent potting soil, the one that I said is a little bit more pliable. If I feel like perhaps it's too pliable, there's too much drainage happening, that could be a nice amendment. Yeah.
If you have to do like bulk topping off, like your beds have just broken down and they're compressed, then I think topsoil would be great for that, because it's cheaper and it's a good base to start with. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Because if you open up garden soil, like, it's clearly got chunks of wood and stuff in it, like bigger, much bigger chunks of wood.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are shredded if you get like a quality garden soil. But then you can start to mix from there if you wanted and add a little bit of this and that. But I think as a whole, like for me, because I have to top off so much this year, and I'm going to come back in and add garden soil as well. And I'll even add some compost, but nowhere near the amount that I have been. And so it's, when you come into the fall and it's like, okay, now it's time to put the garden to bed, you can start to work these things in as needed. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't add everything all at once, especially because I plan, like, one of my beds should be empty in the next month or two. And so it's just going to rest, but I wouldn't just top it off completely right now. You know what I mean? I would kind of start to work into it a little bit and do a little bit one month, and then the next month really add in. I'd probably add in my topsoil first and let that just kind of work in, because of my situation and the fact that, like, my soil's so crumbly, and let that work into the entire bed, and then come back into the spring and then add a little bit more of something else. Is that the method that you do, or?
Well, it all depends on the where, right? Like, so I have access to all three of those components: potting soil, potting soil, compost, topsoil, and garden soil. I don't know if I named all four of them, but you know the four I'm talking about. And a good example is, because I grow in a lot of containers, I'm dealing with a lot of spent potting soil, right? And so it depends. If I have a bed that I feel like nutritionally, and this is all by gut, and I'm not even trying to say that I'm getting it right every time, nutritionally, that it's sound, I may be adding some of the spent potting soil, right? Like, if I keep on adding things to the spent potting soil to make more potting soil, I'm going to have too much potting soil, right? So, I think it's really like, you have to figure out what is going to work in your garden. The front yard flower bed, and I realize I have you on this other screen, and I know you're looking at me saying, why is she looking over there? The front yard flower bed, I've never added what you would consider the good stuff to that.
You just treat your flower.
Listen, I'm just trying to tell you. So it was originally the little bitty round flower beds that you see when someone's dug up a tree. Yep. It started with that. And then for the kind of, over the years, I dug up a little more. And then finally I dug up the entire space, which is about 22, 23 feet or something, maybe 20 feet, call it that, across. And the most of that soil is the soil that was underneath that bad grass. I could never keep grass healthy. And so when I started building up just a few, like maybe a foot up, I was adding, crap soil, right? It's like you don't want to put the good stuff where you're growing these flowers. I know some people are just screeching. And every year that I had soil that I needed to kind of get rid of, if you will, I just dump it in there because that stuff gets compressed too. Wood chips, there's all kinds of crap in there, wood chips mixed in with soil. And so I say that to say, I mean, again, I'm going to brag on myself. It's a showstopper now.
Yeah.
Things grow beautifully in there. I'm not growing food in there, so we have to kind of put an asterisk by that. But I think it's a good example of kind of soil or, kind of garden spaces or what you make of it.
Well, I think that leads to a good question too, because a lot of people think you have to make a raised bed in order to have a garden. And I mean, the question becomes, do you even have to do that? You know what I mean? I don't think you do. I'm going to go ahead and say that because just like you said, like you've added whatever you want into it. And over time, like it's continued to mix and it gets into the native soil that's there and you're putting your plants in it and you're growing them. And, I do the same thing. Like my back bed by the greenhouse, I add, that's where I put a lot of my scraps and stuff in. And that, if it got more sun, it would be my best bed I have. But it just doesn't get as much sun in the fall, so it doesn't do as well. But I add all that, all of the old potting soils and compost and stuff like that. I don't even think about it. So I think you're naturally, and you're doing it in small portions too. So you're not really twisting up the biology of your soil either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so a short answer is, raised beds are absolutely not necessary. Right. And so we've gone down the road. If you're a gardener, you probably already know this. If you're new or thinking about gardening, maybe you don't. But I think there is an aesthetic, but I think a lot of people kind of either don't want to wait until they can create a healthy growing space with the soil they already have in the ground. And then I think that some people truthfully just have shit soil and they know it. And so building out raised beds allows you to control that a bit more, right? As you bring soil in, so again, I planted out my front yard garden after years of, kind of growing in ground in the backyard. And then also after years of having raised beds in the backyard, right? So that was kind of my way. I was sitting and trying to think with one ear and listen with the other ear. I went with metal raised beds, which are kind of sharp looking, right? When I turn down my block, I can see them, right? I only did that in the front yard because I did want something that was a bit more spectacular than wood. Yeah. And I don't know that I thought a lot about, again, them sitting, 17 inches high. Yeah. I didn't think a lot about that. Cause they're still not convenient enough for me to not to have to bend over a lot, I still gotta do that. And look, by May of each year, my back knows it, right? And so I'm sitting and thinking to myself, and I don't know the answer yet. Leonard will have to put a pin in this, but I'm going to tell you where I'm leaning. If I had to do the front yard garden over again, one, would I use raised beds? Two, if I were to use raised beds, would I go with what I have, right? I have no complaints. These metal raised beds have been troopers through Chicago winters, and that's nothing to take lightly. Yeah. They have held up and held strong. And so if I were probably, to be quite frank, 20 years younger, if I was in my 20s, I probably would be gardening much lower to the ground. Yeah. I know better now. Whether they say the one thing you don't get another one of is a back, protected. But I'm kind of leaning towards, I probably do something more like, I know you're not crazy about it, but landscape timbers. It's easy to maneuver, it's easy to work with. I don't have to have sick carpentry skills for it. I can get the height. I can, dictate the height that I want, the expense compared to the metal garden beds. And when I say if I had to do it over now, especially when I consider cost of materials now, I'm not so sure. I kind of feel like maybe I get less play, meaning they go after it less, varmint around. I've been using varmint for the last week. I can't get out of it.
Sorry. I like it.
So I've been, I think maybe clearly they can climb inside. Don't get me wrong. But I think maybe if they were lower to the ground, I'd probably have more of them visiting. There'd probably be more evidence of them visiting, maybe. So anywho, I hate to wrap up with the whole figure out what works for you, but that's what it is, man. Because it all can work.
Well, and for me, I have really sandy soil here. Mm-hmm. So when I originally just started with raised beds, and then I went into the wild garden. I tilled it up, and I pulled roots out of it for days, and then it'd rain, and then more roots would come up, and then I tilled it again, and I just never really could get a hang of growing in it. And I would amend it and work on it and all that stuff. So then I went to do the raised beds, and then I ended up getting what we all know as fill dirt. What you put under construction and stuff like that. But even though I have that fill dirt in there now and I'm working to amend it and make it better, I still feel that I have a better base to work with. And all of the dirt underneath the garden it'll all mix over time. And then the deeper it goes in, it'll get and penetrate into that sandy earth and then kind of continue to mix up. So essentially, even though I may have 6 inches on top, in a couple of years, I have 6 inches below as well. That will be nice and, ready to accept these things. So, it's interesting because when it was positioned to me that like, hey man, topsoil, regular native topsoil grows every single plant you see. Why should it be any different for you to grow your food was a very interesting concept to me. And then the fact of like when you're putting it to bed and, should you do it in winter or summer and stuff like that? There's a lot of conflicting information out there. And for me, it's always made sense to kind of add it in the fall and late winter, well ahead before you go into spring. So 1, it can all start to break down. 2, you can really take your time and get it right. So if you add some, you don't really know what you can do, you can kind of get on that and figure it out, talk to a couple people or whatever. And then 3, it can just, you have that time available for you in the spring to focus on more pressing tasks, because gardening ain't easy.
Yeah, but I also, for more years than I could count, I did only work in the spring going into summer. There was no I didn't even understand the concept of putting a garden to bed, so the early years. And I do like the whole, all right, we're getting started. I'm going to get my 2 bags of dirt, I'm going to come out, I'm going to go and buy my 2 pepper plants from Home Depot and, my big boy tomato plant, and I'm going to plant all of that stuff out. Like I could do that stuff in like a weekend, unless I let the weeds get ahead of me. I have pictures of this is the before, on a Friday, and this is the final on a Monday. That's not my current garden experience. No. Right. So there's a lot more to be done. And so a part of it, quite frankly, to me, is just time management for me. I was talking to a neighbor that's a couple of blocks down. It's funny because I always tell him like we'll go some periods of time. I haven't seen you in weeks. He told me, it's an older gentleman, so I'm always listening for those bits of wisdom. He told me in September, all right, happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Because I know we're getting to the point where I won't see you until next year. And so funny enough, after that moment, just coincidentally, we saw each other like 5 days straight. So I hadn't seen him in like 3 weeks. Saw him this morning when I was taking a quick break, from work. And I was telling him, our weather, it'll be past by the time this airs, but our weather for the next 2 weeks is a godsend for a garden. Yeah. And I'm like, you'll see me out here because I got work to do and the weather is agreeable. And so it's a great opportunity, and someone hold me accountable. If you hear me singing some sad song next year, like, well, I didn't get a chance to pull up my sunflower stalks and, that stuff is still out there because I'm feeling good. I had a little bit of, some sniffles and things, but I'm past that almost. And so I'm like eager, like I got my second wind, if that's a thing in, November. Well, and that's like me. Our first frost date's coming up and we haven't had a frost yet.
and we don't have one in the forecast yet. And I'm checking every day to see what the new day is going to bring, and I don't see anything on the horizon. So it just gives you more and more time to go out there. And it's like this time of year is my busiest time because I'm working on everything. I mean, it's my buddy just called me. He's like, "Where you been?" Same thing with you. And I'm like, "Man, I've been busy." He's like, "What the hell you been doing?" I'm like, "Working in the garden, man, amending, trimming, planting. I'm planting seeds every day, getting ready for winter because like I said, the plan is to let some of these beds just kind of grow out and then done for the season." And it's like I went yesterday and I put my money where my mouth is and I bought a bag of topsoil and I worked it in. I'm going to use a word here. I tilled it in to my where I'm going to put my garlic in a couple weeks, once it starts to cool off more. And as soon as I did that though, Batavia, I'm not lying. I stuck my hands in it and I was like, I get it. Yeah. Like I got it immediately. There was a noticeable difference in the composition of that section of my garden.
And that's the term, the composition of that. Yeah. That side of the garden, which is, it's key. It's setting you up. Well, I think I'm going to say for those in the back, it's setting you up for success next year. Like in sentence, right? And I think that anything that you can do now, while it's at top of mind, then I'm team do it, right? Now, if you're out here, I'm sorry, I got a note about some water backing up in the basement. And I went to the basement this morning. I'll have to check when I get done from a neighbor. So if you're out here and you can't get to the stuff until the spring, please don't say, well, I'm going to wait until next year to garden. Like, it's okay, right? There are probably going to be, I think it's like, technically, if you think about everything that has a structure around it, that you can call a raised bed, it's like 17, 18 raised beds, right? Like, am I going to get to all of that? Maybe, maybe not. So I'll probably be doing some work in the spring and that's okay. But I think to not have that as what could be considered for me in my space as a distraction in the spring it's going to be a big win for me. Put that on my 2023 win.
Yeah. Okay. We'll put it on a year ahead of time. It's one of those things too. So first of all, if your ground's frozen right now, or you're getting like repetitive, I think, I hesitate to say this because I don't really know, but I'm pretty sure that in a lot of places, you're bouncing up and down right now, in and out of freezing and stuff like that. And the average garden bed is, what do you think an average raised bed is? Probably 6 to 8 feet long and somewhere between 2 and 4 feet wide.
Yeah, I think that's right.
You still have plenty of time to go out there and just, if you throw in a bag of something, you're activating that soil, because even though your garden freezes, the life below the frost line still is active, and it will continue to work that bed for you. And when I was living up in Massachusetts, I would take a tarp and lay it over my beds, like a black tarp, and I would let them, when it first started getting real cold, and then that would keep that soil warm, and it would allow it to kind of be a little bit more active for longer. And I would rotate that around. So in this time of year, it'd get freezing and then warm up. It'd get freezing and warm up. And every warm spell we had, I would move it to another bed. And then as it would go through, and I didn't have 18, 19 beds or, like I have, or like you have, or 10 beds like I have now. But even then, like I was able to get around in a month's time and have that stuff still active and be amending and adding stuff to the beds constantly. And that always seemed to kind of work for me. So, unless you're correcting something, like PSA announcement, don't just add compost to your garden only. There it is. You think that's safe to say?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say. My mother, because we're not at the point where she's going to ask me about socks. We're not there quite yet, but we are at the point where she, like every other call, which is a couple of times a week, she's saying, your garden's about done, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so I have to say, well, yeah, because a lot of people think about the garden as tomatoes, cucumbers, and she knows that I'm not growing that, in October, November. But I'm just like, I'm still out here picking greens, and just generally like greens. And, she generally knows what I'm talking about when I say greens. And so I think it's interesting because this year in particular, the blessing of like this, my frost is going to come later than predicted as well. Which, I mean, I pray for every year, and here it is.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this is the least prepared I've been, but whatever, we're here. And so I'm looking at it now and saying, I have time to do these things, which is great. But if I go back to the time when it comes to the things that I was trying to sow and grow, I literally have like 2 more weeks minimally. And I'm talking about with no protection whatsoever. Like, the garden gods have given me 2 more weeks of true fall weather before it gets uber duper cold. And that's awesome. And so I'm trying to make the best of it. So that's a part of like strike while the iron's hot in my mind, use the time you have when you have it.
So are you sewing still?
No, I'm not. And I wish I thought about it 2 weeks ago. I thought about 2 weeks before that. And if I would have just done it when I thought about it. That's why I've been like, I was the same as you, because we got like a little cold snap and I was like, there it is, it's done. And then as I was looking, I was like, wait, it ain't done yet. So I've been going out there and like I keep sowing like my turnips and kohlrabis and radishes and stuff like that. Just trying to keep, because I'm like, look, if I've got 2 weeks, I can potentially get stuff up to where they're already, I don't want to say frost resistant, but they're cool weather crops as it is. So I can potentially get things up and going and have even more than I had anticipated, because with my whole situation of getting sick, my garden's really struggled for the fall, getting it up and going. And I was out there today and I was looking, I was like, man, it's actually starting to come along. And with the things that I've just planted in the past couple of days, if they come up, like I'll have a full garden, which I didn't anticipate doing. Now I still will harvest and let them go to bed like I had initially planned. But I mean, I don't know. It's going to be interesting, but the longer it stays warm, I mean, you just, like you said, strike while the iron's hot, man. Yeah. Now it's funny because I've been trying to sow for fall since July. And my last sowings I direct sowed September the 21st. It's funny how some of those things stick in my head. September the 21st, thinking my average first frost date is scheduled now to be November the 1st. Again, knowing I'm sowing kind of almost all cold hardy. Some of them are kind of like cold tolerant. And we got through, there was like maybe a week where we were dipping close to freezing. We got close, but didn't touch it. And so now we're on the other side of, kind of the, oh, shoot, when's the frost coming? And so it's interesting because I'm watching the growth in those periods of time. And I'm glad that I didn't sow my entire garden, but it absolutely was a missed opportunity. I had plans that I just shelved, and even if I would have continued to sow in other places, because September 21st, I was already 3 weeks later than I wanted. I've been sowing those 3 weeks, but the stuff just wasn't germinating, right?
Yeah.
And so if I would have continued to sow more on September the 21st, I would have had more active gardens, beds to manage. But again, I have enough, which is, I think, important. And guess what it gives me an opportunity to do? It gives me an opportunity to see, like, put my money where my mouth is around harvest early and often. I have some arugula right now as we record that's fit to eat.
Where's it at?
I mean, it's still in the garden bed.
So we're almost there. We have recognition.
Yeah, I didn't say... Well, yeah, the acknowledgement of, it's under cover too. It's under a row cover. And so it's prime for, set it and forget it.
Yeah.
Arugula young I enjoy it much better than like a little bit older arugula. So again, perfect time to say, because I have this, and I'll wrap up here. I have this challenge of like, especially this time of year, well, I want it to keep growing because I know my window is still short. But I think something that, if you're putting together those pieces a minute ago, is again, take advantage of it while it's here, Excuse me. what happens if a tremendous cold front comes in and arugula isn't that hardy? You know, enjoy it now. Enjoy arugula when it's 3 inches tall and keep on moving.
Yeah.
Right? Like, ultimately, you want to eat it. So whether you eat it now or later, as long as you eat it, go ahead and eat it now. Make sure you can get it.
Yeah. You know, the one thing, too, that I need to say is if you're like me and you can grow most of the winter or even all winter, you know, I mulch my beds religiously. And what I'll do this time of year is I'll come back in and whatever I'm amending with, I just put it right on top of that mulch. Because this time, you know, in most places, I mean, we haven't had rain in almost a month. My rain barrels are going dry. That's how I know to sound the alarm. You can put it on top, and then with the rains coming as often as they do, and on top of you watering and stuff, it'll actually work that stuff through, keep that mulch moist, and then by spring, that stuff will be broken down in your garden, and you can just add right on top of it. You know what I mean? And I'll even go back in at some point, add another layer of mulch on top of that as, you know, my upper layer. And then if you go back in and if you lightly till or mix up your garden in any way, that stuff is going to get churned into it and it's going to improve your soil over time. So that's another thing you can do, because like right now, like I said, my garden's fully planted and I have a lot of work to do on the soil in some areas. So I just kind of went in there and look, this is how I look at it. Small steps is better than no steps. Okay. So instead of just rushing through it and being like, nah, screw it, I can't do it because it's planted, like, as we speak right now, it's doing something out there. You know what I mean? When it rains, when it gets watered, that stuff is going to work its way through the nooks and crannies of that mulch, and it's going to get into the soil, and it's just going to help break it down. And I moved it, so I just put it like in the middle, like the edges of it are exposed, the mulch. And when I moved the soil away, guess what? It's flat, it's wet, and it's starting to break down already. And the dirt underneath, the soil is warmer underneath because it's starting to cook a little bit. So, you know, if you're like me and you have those situations, you can definitely do that. It's a good option to have. But with that being said, I know that Miss Batavia is going to give you the recipe of the day.
So I was so glad you didn't say a banger recipe of the day. I needed you to play this down a bit. So as of the recording, I am finishing up with some of my late season summer crops. So I'm mixing up recipes and preserving things. And I got some bangers, but at this point, it's going to be like December by the time you hear this. And I'm not going to like tease you. So I'm going to give you something that can be used and probably is still useful to you now and 365 days a year. I'm going to give you 2 different types of season blends. And I'm getting it out of the...
Dude, that's a banger.
Blue.
I love that.
Yeah. I knew you would because it's herbs. So I'm going to give it to you out of the Ball Canning book, the all new Ball book, Canning and Preserving, Book of Canning and Preserving. I mean, this is pretty par for the course, though. I mean, they've not come up with anything magical. Italian seasoning blends. It's going to make about 6 tablespoons. So double it, triple it, quadruple it as you see fit. So it's going to be dried herbs and a mixture of garlic powder. Now, this is key because you need to go into that closet, into that shoebox where you put your fresh herbs like months ago that you were drying, and go and get those now before you forget about them. You're going to use 2 tablespoons of dried oregano, 2 tablespoons of dried basil, a tablespoon of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons, I said teaspoons of dried thyme, and 2 teaspoons of crushed red pepper. I never add crushed red pepper in mixes like this. I like to control even that small set of spice. But mix it up together and you have an Italian seasoning blend.
Sorry, Janet Jackson got in my head right away.
All right, so second one, and they actually have a bunch here, but I'm only going to give you 2. Second one is a smoky Mexican seasoning blend. So this makes about 1/3 cup. All right, again, multiple recipes you'd use this for, right? So we're going to go with all teaspoons here. So you have 2 teaspoons of cumin seeds. I said seeds, 2 teaspoons of coriander seeds, 4 teaspoons of chili powder, 4 teaspoons of ground chipotle chili powder that Ben's going to send me from the chipotle powder or chilies that he made. 2 teaspoons of dried oregano and 2 teaspoons of garlic powder. So you're going to heat the cumin seeds and coriander seeds in a small non-stick skillet. You're going to let that get, aromatic. You want it that aroma. So about 5 minutes stirring until toasted and fragrant. And then you're going to remove that from the skillet. It gets a little bit tricky because you're putting this in a grinder. You could definitely use the powdered versions of those blends, but this is going to be a bit more flavorful. So you're going to put it in a grinder, blend it up, or you can use a mortar and pestle if you want. And then once you have everything ground, you can add everything else that I listed: chili powder, chipotle chili powder, and oregano and garlic powder. And now you have a smoky seasoning blend.
Have you ever used a mortar and pestle?
Yep.
They're a bitch to use.
I've used it for my pesto.
You know what I use?
Good.
Coffee grinder. Works
I have
great.
a coffee grinder as well. I used it once or twice for my pesto, and then I decided, I'm in Chicago. I don't need to be that authentic. I'm going to go ahead and go to the food processor.
Yeah. Yeah, well, especially when you're making big batches. But I got excited because, man, I love seasoning blends, but the stuff you buy at the store, man, it can be so hit or miss. And by the time you go through and try it all out, dude, you got a whole rack full of stuff that you're just like, ugh.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's the reason why I'm glad that they put 6 teaspoons. That's probably could easily get you through 3 recipes depending on what you're making. So if you don't care that much for it, you're done with it. You could obviously even half that recipe if you want to just try out, that first one that I gave you. I do a classic house seasoning blend, which is it's in a regular shaker, salt, pepper, and garlic powder. That's one of my kind of standard, again, house seasonings that I use daily.
I want to learn how to make my own garlic powder. Do you know how?
I've seen videos on it, but I didn't have enough garlic this year to try to give it a try.
Yeah, I don't know how much it would make. I don't know if it'd be worth it. Mm-hmm. Garlic powder is so much easier to use than chopping garlic. I'm just going to say it out loud.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry. But fresh garlic tastes a lot better, so there it is.
Mm-hmm. It tastes much more like garlic.
Yeah. It's much more pungent. But, seriously, everybody, it's all about... If you're going to amend your garden beds in the fall, I think it's a good time, a good use of your time in wrapping up the garden. You can add it to the list. There's a lot of chores that you can do, but I think this one will help you set forward because there's going to be a time in the spring when you're doing it and you're going to be like, shit, I'd rather just be planting my tomatoes or, harvesting my taters or, whatever. So... It's, give it a shot, see what it is. And you don't have to add it all at once. I would definitely, anything that breaks down, I would put in first. There it is. I summed it up in one sentence. Sounded like it, but actually I don't think I did. And on that note, come check us out on all our places. We'd love to see you on Patreon. Teespring, that code is XMAS2022, 20% off everything. And until next time.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out the Backyard Gardens podcast.
If you like what we're doing and you want to continue to support the podcast, head over to our Patreon page to sign up.
You can also make a one-time donation using PayPal. Both of these links are in the description.
With your support, we can continue growing and helping others in their gardens. See ya.
If you guys want some Backyard Gardens gear,
go to the link below and check out our t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and other gear.
All purchases go towards helping to support the show, so thank you so much in advance, and we hope you enjoy. We want everybody to have a garden, and we're going to give you a chance to win free seeds every month.
Head over to backyardgardenstv.com and enter your email address to be entered in all of our giveaways.
Good luck.
We want you to be a part of our gardening community. DM us a picture of your garden at Backyard Gardens TV on Instagram, and we will share it with our listeners.